is a series of free events that we've been doing over the past month, maybe month plus at this point, and we'll be continuing through the end, even past a little bit through the end of the summer. Keep on coming. A lot of interesting things. In case this is the first arena event that you've ever been to, we do 4 core things. We do training. We help train campaign staff. We do career support. We help folks find and get jobs in the political ecosystem. We create a community. We have things from virtual coffees to Arena Connections. And then we have a toolbox, which is a absolutely fantastic suite of free tools that that you can download for your campaign or organization. All right, so just wanted to shout out our sponsors. Google, Grassroots Analytics, ROI, Winnable, Running Mate, Sticky Note Labs, they all do fantastic, really great things. Check them all out. And I also want to equally shout out our partners who have been instrumental in helping us build out this program. They are too numerous to mention all by name, but thank you to all of them, especially Forum NYC, where Mira, who hosting this panel, is from. All right, we'll kick it over to poll time for anyone who's interested in getting connected with any of the numerous arena partners. And so maybe we can launch that. Love to see maybe 50% participate, maybe a little bit more. If there are any of these partners that you all are interested in getting to be connected with. And after, we'll make sure that that you're connected with these orgs and these orgs are able to reach out to you. Cool. All right. While you all are voting, I think we are going to kick it to the business at hand. Just one thing to level set. I know that a lot of you all who are in this room right now have really interesting and fantastic questions about ranked choice voting, about what happened in the election in New York City, about a whole host of other things that are on your minds. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear what they are. And the best way to make sure that they get to our moderators, that they're actually asked, is by going into the Q&A functionality. That's going to be on the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it, go to the More button and scroll through the many options, and you'll see an option that says Q&A, and you can just drop your question in there. If there's a question in there that you really like, there's an option to kind of upvote questions, or just upvote questions. So if you really want a question answered in there, just drop it in there. If it gets asked in the chat, it's probably going to get lost in, there's just a lot of stuff happening in the chat. So make sure if you have any questions, put it in the Q&A. With that, I am going to kick it over to Mira, who is the founder of Forum New York City. It's a civic and political engagement network focused on expanding the electorate in New York City by providing access to local candidates, elected officials, and thought leaders committed to a more livable city. This is a joint event with Arena as part of Forum New York City's Mayoral series that kicked off in January and will continue to provide opportunities to convene, connect, and learn together as we head into the general election in November. I cannot say enough good things about Mira. I will kick it over to you.
Thank you so much for that, Aziz. I'm so delighted to be here with all of you today and our absolutely fabulous group of panelists today. We, together in this next hour, are going to debrief on what has been the most fascinating mayoral primary in maybe the history of New York City, certainly in my own memory. I hope you all have felt that as well. And we're going to talk about what happened in the primary, and in particular, because we have folks from all over the country tuning in today, we're going to talk about ranked choice voting and how ranked choice voting, this is the second time that this has been utilized in New York City for the mayoral primary, and how it has shaped the context of this very fascinating contest that we're a part of. And so in just a minute, I'm going to ask our esteemed panelists to tell us a bit more about themselves, their organizations, their role in this primary. We're delighted to have today Andrew Epstein, Communication Director from Zoran Mamdani's campaign, also happens to be an Arena alum. So very delighted to have Andrew with us. We have Rebecca Rodriguez, Campaign Manager from Brad Lander's campaign. Super delighted to have Rebecca and to hear from both of you about how ranked choice voting shaped the strategy for your campaigns. We have Susan Lerner with us from Common Cause New York, who has been instrumental in the implementation of bringing ranked choice voting to New York City. And we have Deb Otis, Director of Research and Policy for Fair Vote, who looks at election reform on the national stage. So super excited to hear, to be a part of this conversation and hear all of your insights in this moment. Before we do that, I just want to say this, because we have now over 100 people on the Zoom, 115 people on the Zoom. And listen, this is a time when I would blame no one for crawling under a rock, deciding not to read the paper, disconnecting entirely, and deciding that that was necessary for their own mental health. But all of you on this call today have made the choice to do the opposite of that, which is to show up, to engage, and to wrestle with some of the really difficult questions that we're facing as a city and as a country. And I think that that's really extraordinary. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you, all that you're doing, and how important and impactful it all is. So thank you all for spending this hour with us. Appreciate all of you. Also, I just want to acknowledge that there are many other organizations that I think brought people to us today, brought this wonderful group together. And so perhaps if you found out about this event from somewhere other than Forum NYC or Arena, and you want to drop in the chat the organization that you're a part of that brought you into this conversation, we would love to hear that. One of our goals is to continue to create connectivity and collaboration amongst the many grassroots organizations that are mobilizing people and meeting the moment. And so would love to hear about what you're involved in. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to each of our panelists. Just to kick it off, I'd ask you to tell us about what your, just introduce yourself and say a bit about your involvement in the 2025 New York City Mayoral Primary. What brings you here today? Why don't we start off with Andrew, if only because you're at the top of my Zoom screen.
Thank you all. Thanks, Mira, and everyone for being here. I'm really happy to be back with the Arena. I was in the class of summer of 2019 in Arena Academy, which included an incredible group of people. Alvin Bragg, the current Manhattan District Attorney, Khalil Anderson, who is a member of the Assembly, all before they got elected. So it was a very exciting to watch everybody grow out of that training and into these roles they've taken on across the city. I served as communications director on Zoran Mamdani's campaign. I had worked for the preceding 4.5, 5 years as a chief of staff in the New York State Assembly for a different member of the Assembly, Emily Gallagher, who represents Greenpoint and Williamsburg. I had run her first campaign for office right after the Arena training. We defeated a 48-year incumbent. She became a member of the Assembly, and it was through working through Zoran's office and others in Albany, I came to know him and jumped on his campaign a few weeks before it launched. I think my official start was towards the end of September 2024. And in that role, I held a lot of different things, producing the video and social media content, dealing with the incoming and outgoing press. I mean, we started as a very, very small team, and remained so for much of the campaign. And obviously it was a whirlwind and reached the outcome we wanted, even though we have another election to run now. But that's been my role, and that's what I've done over the past months, and I'm excited to talk about it here.
Thank you, Andrew. We definitely want to hear a bit about those videos, so we're going to need to come back to that.
Sure.
Why don't we go to Susan?
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Susan Lerner. I'm the Executive Director of Common Cause New York, and I'm also the Board Chair of Rank the Vote NYC. As Executive Director of Common Cause New York, we helped to convince the Charter Revision Commission in 2018 and 2019 that New York was ready for ranked choice voting. And we did that by building a broad coalition of groups from many different communities around New York City, educating voters, educating advocates about ranked choice voting and how it worked. We helped to lead the campaign once it was on the ballot in 2019, where it passed with almost 75% of the voters adopting RCV. And subsequently, through Common Cause and Rank the Vote, we have been educating voters and campaigns and candidates on how ranked choice voting works. So we lead a coalition of over 50 groups across New York City. We have been very actively involved in helping translate materials into, well, in 2021, we translated into 13 different languages. And you haven't lived in a fight unless you have been on a phone call with two Bangla speakers fighting about how they're going to translate ranked choice voting into Bangla. So there are various challenges that we have faced with our partners, but I think the proof is in the pudding. The success in 2021, where we had over 20 different organizers and communities, culturally and linguistically diverse, talking to voters, having it be adopted successfully, and then, of course, continuing working with candidates and campaigns, as well as voters and advocates, to see ranked choice voting really play out the way we advocate and teach campaigns to use it, which is to use it to build coalition politics. And having that really come to the fore in 2025 has been very satisfying. So that's how we've been involved. And I guess we've been involved from the beginning in New York City, and just grateful to see it actually being adopted by voters and by candidates.
Thank you so much for that, Susan, and for your extraordinary work. Deb?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Mira. I am thrilled to be here having a conversation with this amazing group of people today. I'm with an organization called Fair Vote. We are a nonprofit working at the national level. We do research and advocacy around election reforms, including ranked choice voting. And so my role here is Director of Policy and Research, which means a big part of my job is analyzing how ranked choice voting works in practice in the places that already use it. And so obviously we've got great news on that front, especially from this recent election in New York City, where voters like it, voters are using the rankings, campaigns are embracing it. I'm here today, I think, to sort of put what's happening in New York City in the national context with other places where reform is winning and succeeding. On a personal note, I'm based in Washington, D.C. I saw from the chat we have a few other D.C. folks here. DC is going to be one of the next locations to implement ranked choice voting. We passed it in November, overwhelmingly in this city, and we'll have it in place for primaries in 2026, so next summer. I think the 2026 primaries might be a really wild time. You know, I can see already lots of candidates wanting to enter these primaries. And I think the places that have not yet implemented reform like this will really wish that they had, because they'll be dealing with crowded fields and needing a way for voters to navigate that. So I'm thrilled that DC is going to be joining New York City next year in ranked choice voting.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Deb. It's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out and how different contexts may adapt in the RCV environment. We're also going to be joined by Rebecca Rodriguez, who is the campaign manager for Brad Lander's mayoral campaign. She's just a little bit delayed, so she will join us just in a few minutes. But I thought, I know on this Zoom we have very knowledgeable folks, but I thought just to set the stage, maybe if we can start with, what exactly is ranked choice voting? And in New York in particular, what was behind the movement to implement RCV? And in particular in primaries, not in the general election. Maybe Susan, if you can kick us off with that.
So ranked choice voting is a way for voters, as Deb was saying, to make sense of crowded fields. And we thought that New York City was a place where ranked choice voting made a lot of sense because of the positive impact that our public financing system makes, which means that we have a lot of races, particularly in the primaries, where you have very crowded fields. And in fact, for a recent race for public advocate, you had 13 different candidates. So for us, ranked choice voting was really kind of the next step after public financing. Let's help voters make sense of large fields. And let's be sure that voters really understand that it increases the power that they have. Because what we were hearing in response to crowded fields was that voters felt trapped. They felt trapped between advice they were getting that a particular candidate was going to be the winner, but it wasn't really the candidate that they favored. They felt that they had to vote for the lesser of two evils. Or in fields from different communities where you would have more than one representative, one candidate from a particular community, there was pressure on multiple candidates to resign and to pull out so that the vote wouldn't be split. So ranked choice voting is a way in which voters are confident that they're not going to waste their vote on a lesser of two evils, and they're not going to worry about splitting their vote and having somebody that will not represent their community be elected. And so that's why we really advocated for ranked choice voting in New York City, to address what we were seeing as the complaints we were hearing about a positive, which is a lot of candidates running.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Susan. I see one question popping up in the Q&A that might be helpful to pose now, which is, in New York, how was ranked choice voting adopted? Was it through a ballot initiative or legislation? What is the actual process of implementing ranked choice voting in your jurisdiction?
Well, the actual process was through a charter revision commission, which is kind of a quasi-legislative body. So we lobbied the commission with this broad coalition of groups to have them place it on the ballot. But because it changes the way in which we run our elections, it has to be approved by the voters. So it was a combined legislative referendum process where we got the Charter Revision Commission to design the system in tandem with us. And I can talk about why we chose primaries and not primary in general for New York City in a second. And then it went on the ballot, and we ran the campaign talking to voters to convince voters that they should vote for it. And we advocated that it be for the primaries only in New York City to start, because New York has an unusual form of fusion voting, if you're familiar with fusion voting. Fusion voting is the system where a candidate is endorsed by more than one party. And in some places that have fusion voting, the candidate will be listed on the ballot, and any party that endorses the candidate will be listed under the candidate. But New York, home of Tammany Hall, is very party-centric. And so our ballots are arranged by party. So if a candidate is endorsed by more than one party, the candidate's going to appear twice on the general election ballot. And we felt that was going to be difficult with introducing RCV for the general election, to educate people not to rank the same candidate more than once if that candidate appeared on the ballot 2 or 3 times. So we advocated for primary only to begin, and then let's take a look at it. And now it's pretty clear we probably should expand RCV into the general election now that New York's voters are familiar with it, and we're not as concerned that they would vote for the same person 2 or 3 times.
Thank you for that, Susan. I just want to take a minute to welcome Rebecca Rodriguez, campaign manager for Brad Lander for New York City. Thank you so much for joining us, Rebecca. We've just kicked off, and I'd asked everyone to say a few words about your and your organization's role in the primary election. Do you want to just take a moment to introduce yourself?
Yes, happy to do so. Thank you. Just want to start off by saying thank you to everyone for your interest in here. This is a very important topic. Want to express gratitude to Irina, to you, Mira, and my co-panelists here. These are important conversations and will help us be strategic, more strategic every cycle, which is great. So as Mira stated, my name is Rebecca Rodriguez. Really glad to be here with you all. I was deputy campaign manager for Lander for mayor, but my history in electoral politics, in particular with New York, goes back to 2018. And I have done congressional, state, city council, and now citywide races. So it's fascinating to me anyway, and I imagine for folks here too. It's a fascinating topic, and there's always more to learn. So I am here as a student and also to share what I know as well. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Rebecca. So grateful to have you. And Susan was just grounding us sort of in the process for adopting RCV in New York City. Since we have kind of a mixed group around the country here, maybe Deb, you can zoom out for us a little bit and talk about RCV as one aspect of election reform and what is behind the movement to implement RCV in other jurisdictions across the country.
Absolutely. It is one of the fastest growing election reforms out there because folks are ready to kind of move into the structural reform space. You know, the ranked choice movement is full of people who initially came from other issues. They worked on various issues, you know, maybe it was climate change or reproductive health or anything. And they've worked on these issues for years and just keep hitting a wall because even when there's popular support behind an issue, folks feel like our elected officials are not accountable and you can't make progress on these issues, even when the people are demanding it. And so folks are looking towards these structural solutions, saying we need to change the system by which people get into office so that they really are more responsive to the voters and we can start tackling all of these other issues that we need to. And so that's why ranked choice voting is in 2 states and 50 cities and counties so far. New York City, obviously the largest city in the country, and is serving as a good model for other places that are interested in using it. You know, New York is a little uncommon in that your city elections are partisan. And so you're doing ranked choice in these party primaries, where in a lot of other places, it's nonpartisan city elections. And so I think one of the nice things about ranked choice voting is that it's pretty versatile. And we've seen it be implemented in a variety of different contexts to sometimes solve different problems. You know, I think Susan did a great job of outlining the problems that it's solving in New York City. You know, it's creating positive campaigning, it's giving voters more voice, it's ensuring that candidates who are similar don't split the vote and harm each other. And one of the other great things it's doing in cities is just a practical consideration. It's saving money. You know, New York City used to hold primary runoff elections. You think it's hard to get people to turn out in a June primary. We'll try to get people to turn out in a July primary runoff 3 weeks later, right? The last time New York City did one of these, it cost $15 to $20 million, which was more than the budget of the office that was being elected in that primary. And so cities all around the country are finding this just practical benefit because municipal budgets are tight and you can use that funding for other things by eliminating these runoffs and just doing it all at once and letting voters choose one time. And so those are just some of the reasons we're seeing it really growing. We're seeing a lot more interest in states that do have partisan elections, especially as we look towards the next election cycle. Elections are getting more and more crowded and voters are getting more and more frustrated. And so I think that explains the rising interest and the growth of this reform.
Yeah, I can say it's also very satisfying from a voter perspective to get a result that very night, though nobody expected that, but we'll come back to that in a few minutes. So I'm curious now that this is the second time we're using RCV in a mayoral primary in New York City, right? 2021 and then this year. From Andrew and Rebecca, I'm curious how this shaped your campaign and what your electoral strategy was in the primary. Maybe Andrew, would you kick us off?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, Zoran was the perfect candidate, and this was the perfect campaign for a ranked choice voting system. Starting, first of all, with the thing that grassroots, insurgent, often very progressive campaigns get told in a variety of contexts, which is that they're going to act as a spoiler. And obviously, having ranked choice voting takes that off the table. It also works for somebody like Zoran, whose message was very consistent and very positive and always about bringing people in while also still being able to name a clear enemy. And so from the beginning of the campaign to the very end of the campaign, Zoran always said, I will criticize no other candidate besides disgraced New York executives, whether present or past, right? And obviously we had 2 that could fit into that category, Eric Adams as mayor and the former governor, Andrew Cuomo. And he said that on day 1 of the campaign, and he said that at day 2. So that is both a way to bring people in and invite the coalitions that ended up being so critical, and none more so than the cross endorsement with Comptroller Lander. But also to say that while we can find areas of agreement, and while we can that we should be constantly talking about our positive vision for the city, there are other forces in this election that we want to say are outside of that. And for us, that was originally Eric Adams, and then ultimately Andrew Cuomo. And that was the message consistently all the way through. I also think that this election really kind of smashed some of the mythology that had grown up around the 2021 election, where it was true because it was brand new. There was confusion. I mean, I remember, and I'm sure others will too, people telling me in 2021, well, Eric Adams is the person I least want to be mayor, so I'm ranking him fifth, right? Because that says he's my least favorite mayor. And of course, ranking anybody on your ranked choice ballot is voting for them. And in the case of 2021, that election was ultimately determined through exhausted every round of ranked choice voting. And so a fifth place rank for Eric Adams was eventually voting for him in his extremely narrow victory over Catherine Garcia. I think it was less than 7,000 votes. People really, and there was a kind of prophecy that nothing had changed, nobody would learn, nobody would be able to figure out the system. I think that was completely disproven in this election. There was a great understanding of what ranked choice voting was. There were sophisticated strategies that were used by candidates and organizations and PACs. I think of the DREAM effort. First it was don't rank Eric and Andrew for mayor, then it was don't rank evil Andrew for mayor. Where people really got the word out that, like, here's how you use ranked choice voting, fill out your ballot, and don't put anybody on it, even fifth, that you don't want to be mayor. I also think that it smashed the idea that ranked choice voting was so complicated and intimidating that it would diminish turnout. We just had the most turnout in a Democratic primary in New York City since David Dinkins in 87 or 89. Sorry. But, and Zoran himself won more votes throughout the ranked choice ballot than any candidate in the history of New York City primaries. We had, obviously, turnout is not what any of it, all of us, I think, probably want 100% turnout. But given where things have been and where things were heading, there is no evidence that ranked choice voting diminished turnout. If anything, I think it brought more people in this election. And so those are kind of two of the biggest takeaways for me. And I really think, and then of course, what you said, I mean, we always knew we could win. We had a plan to win. Did we know that Governor Cuomo would concede at 9:30 p.m. on election night? No. And I will say that that's also fortunate too, because while you can't prove a negative, I would suspect that had this played out in the subsequent week through a very complicated and fraught ranked choice voting machinations, people would have kicked up dust about ranked choice voting, right? And that is one thing that we do need to build buy-in. If we had been down on election night, but came back through ranked choice voting, I do think people would have tried to use that as a way to say, see, this is not really democratic. So, when we get to that scenario, and we haven't had that scenario yet, right? Because Eric Adams, even though it was a close at the end, was still up in the first round. That's going to be the challenge for us, is when we get to that point. But thankfully for our campaign, we were able to be ahead in the first round and ahead at the end of it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, Andrew. I do think that voters got much more savvy this time in terms of how to use that ranking to their benefit. And it's interesting because I think it also requires more of voters up front. And for those who don't know, New York City is at like the lowest turnout rate of any major city in the country. I think we're, second next to San Antonio, Texas or something. So getting people out to vote is a challenge. And the idea that folks had to invest more to figure out their ranking and they still showed up tells you something. I think we're still figuring out what it is. Rebecca, would you like to share some thoughts from Camp Lander?
Yeah. Just listening to Andrew, I feel, largely we agree on a lot of our analysis of like what this has taught us. I think we also learned some things from 2021. And I think one of those things, and Brad has said this a few times, had Catherine Garcia and Maya Wiley cross-endorsed each other, we might have ended up with a different mayor. And so I think even in our planning, it was understood that that was a lever that we needed to be ready to pull. if the situation called for it. And I think there's some exceptions to the New York mayoral race, right? Not every race has a Cuomo type, which is like a legacy person, so like every, very high name ID awareness, also deeply polarizing, right? But it's someone that like we knew a formidable component of this was that like this is a very well-known, long history, national profile candidate. And I think it kind of like, I think we were curious to test the RCV rule book and see what would apply, there, just given that this is an exceptional circumstance. But it is something that we understood, and I think, any candidate, generally speaking, some candidates run to land somewhere else, but I do believe the mayoral candidates this cycle ran to win. But I think ranked choice voting allowed us to think of alternative strategies that would still mean a win. And we do think it's a win that like Cuomo landed where he did. And that there was like this strong movement to build awareness. And in thinking of like, when Andrew talked about filling out your 5 ballots, the narrative of why you should leave people off your ballot. Let's talk about why that's important. I think it also presented some typical electoral challenges. People don't pay a lot of attention to a certain amount of time. And then it's a lot of investment in like deep education. New York is one of those states that we have a further lefty reputation than what exists. There's loopholes and, hurdles that you have to jump to, in the voting process, and our fight to make it deeply accessible, is still a challenge. Investments in voter education and in like participatory democracy is like everyone should be voting, and like we should invest in these as it becomes a challenge. And so I think like the beauty of ranked choice voting is that people started to really try and understand the candidates that they would pick. And so I thought that was like great, just democracy writ large, great to see. And yeah, and so like as was noted, the decision to cross endorse Zoran was because we understood that is something ranked choice voting allowed. It was a strategic decision to make sure that we wouldn't land with the worst case scenario, because you can do that, and that's a win for all of us. And so that's where we landed there, and it was something that we learned from 2021.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rebecca. And I think, one of the things that was surprising in New York City was that I think we were all expecting that there would be several rounds of tabulation of the RCV process before we got any result. And then yet on election night, right, I don't know, before I went to bed for sure, Cuomo had already conceded before that process took place. What accounted for that particular outcome? Anyone want to take that one?
Well, if you don't run an RCV campaign, which he did not, if you tell your voters, I'm the guy, don't bother to rank anybody else because I'm perfect, and you are behind by a substantial amount on election night, on a ranked choice voting system, we call that guy a loser because he has no way to pick up second and third votes. So he knew he had very little addition, and he could not catch Zoran because he ignored ranked choice voting. May that be a lesson.
Yeah, he ignored it. And also, I think just given the data that we knew about him as being a polarizing candidate, you either thought he was great or you couldn't stand him, right? And it's like that doesn't really lend for a 2s, 3s, 4 strategy, which I think, maybe is a fault in the leadership style. But yeah, I think you're right, Susan. This was all win on number ones. And we'll see. I will reserve my complaints about the BOE for another occasion, but we'll see what the full tabulations are, because we have more data to help us analyze and dissect this further. But I think our prediction is that he didn't run on it, and he wouldn't have done well on it anyway. Just not the type of person who liked accepting someone would rank them second, third, or fourth.
I'd add to that, I was making Susan's exact point at about 9:30 p.m. to the press that was waiting at our campaign event. I went upstairs and kind of gaggling with them. We were up from they released the early voting totals, right after 9 p.m. They had them tabulated and it showed us up, but I was like, is it enough? Everybody was thinking maybe the Cuomo surges on election day. So I went up to kind of talk to the reporters and say, look, we feel pretty good though, because of exactly what Susan was saying. This guy was not running a ranked choice voting election. I mean, even people who had endorsed him, did not return the favor, right? And so we felt pretty good about that. And I'm kind of spinning this for the press saying, hold on, it's going to be a long night, maybe be a long week, but we're feeling good. When I got back downstairs, Cuomo was on the phone with Zoran conceding. That's how quickly it became clear to him and his team. And then our night changed very, very fast.
One of the interesting trends that I've been seeing is the real improvements in ranked choice polling. This victory on election night was a little bit of a surprise because the polling showed that it was either close or that Cuomo had a bit of a lead, but the ranked choice polls that were out in the field showed that by the final round of ranked choice, Mamdani would be gaining a lot more than Cuomo would. And so once he had that lead on election night, it was nice to see all of these polls kind of showing things moving in the same direction so that you can make these predictions pretty confidently in ranked choice races, just like you can in non-ranked choice.
Yeah, thank you for that, Deb. That's such an important point. I mean, I think it's interesting to think about how the ranked choice voting environment gives us different candidates, right? And you may say like people campaign a certain way and they govern in a different way, right? But in this environment where you have to, if not play nice in the sandbox with others, you have to at least acknowledge that there are others there. What does that mean in terms of how somebody will ultimately govern once elected? So that's really interesting. I want to ask also, as you all know, Arena is in the business of campaigning folks who run many of the really important campaigns across the country. And so in addition to thinking about the RCV context, what other kind of tactics and strategies did you deploy in this campaign that were instrumental to the outcome? What can we learn from this primary about what it means to run a smart, strategic campaign in this environment?
Well, I'll jump in. And just because you brought up the videos earlier and not to undersell my own role in the work that I do, but it's been funny since the election how much those have been kind of like let me just say, I think style is really important. It's downstream from substance. And we would not have, those videos would not have been effective if we didn't have an agenda that connected with people, and a candidate who could connect with people. It's critically important to find creative ways to communicate and create your own kind of attentional environment. I mean, there was a time not long ago where it would be crazy to say that the New York Times editorial board publishing an editorial saying, do not rank this person, would then win by 12 points, right? And that there's a lot of reasons for that having to do with institutional media but a lot of it is also that by then, I mean, we were running this campaign from the moment it launched as if it was the day before the election. That was the level of energy and intensity. And by doing that and by being very consistent about a message, but being kind of eclectic in the places that we brought that message, right? It was always affordability, it was always cost of living, but it was in a gazillion different contexts and from kind of fun visual puns to like jumping in the freezing ocean to just stopping and talking to voters on the street. The consistency of the message, but the diversity and volume of the context for it, I think was a really big reason that why by the time we got to the traditional media players, kind of all the editorial boards of the newspapers, everybody saying, nah, don't rank this guy, $30 million in super PAC spending, saying the most atrocious lies and smears against this person. By that point, people had already developed a relationship with him and with the campaign and its message. Even by like December or January, when we were moving around the city, people would say him and they wouldn't just say, oh, that's Zoran. They'd be like, oh, that's the freeze the rent guy. Or like, that's the free buses guy, right? And you could have an agenda repeat, people would repeat the agenda back to you. And so I think that's, the playbook didn't really change once in this whole campaign. And I think that was also critically important because there was so much media discourse about what the election was supposed to be about, right? It was going to be about Eric Adams' corruption and mismanagement, or maybe it was going to be about the way that law and order was defined in 2021, even though I think there was some revisionist history about that because Eric Adams, in some ways, kind of ran as a reformer in addition to running as a law. I mean, he was like always talking about safety and justice, but regardless, I think there was an overcorrection or a thing that happens often with, I think, kind of consultants and where like you kind of like, okay, you try to figure out where the electorate is and where the polling is, and you kind of move towards that, as opposed to saying, I'm going to actually lead people and stay consistent and see if I can bring because people care about a lot of different things. And depending on what day it is or what you put in front of them, but you can also bring out and accentuate the salience of particular issues if you are consistent about it and have an agenda that speaks directly to it. And that was the playbook from day one. And we just ran at it as hard as we could every single day. And that allowed us to get where we needed to be.
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what Andrew has stated here. I want to, just because like this is a conversation around use of political strategies, just want to affirm that like polling is an indicator, but not an absolute predictor, as we've learned. And it's always been that. And I think the emphasis of polling has like, I mean, we look at it, we make a lot of decisions based off of it. The press does a lot based off of what they see there. But it's maybe a less percentage share than it used to be in the past. Now we have to include like direct voter engagement and the power of social media being that as a way to, and the way you articulated, Andrew, in a very like eclectic, in a myriad of ways, but engaging on the same message, because like what was clear there is like every message was a conversation with a voter or to a voter, and like their response to that is repeating that back at you. And so I think that is a strategy. And I would argue like the message was so consistent, it kind of shifted the conversation. And it became about like this very crystal clear message that largely apolitical people understood the impact of. And it became a question that all candidates had to answer. And I think that's like a very, very powerful way to engage an electorate and to have a dialogue with voters. It's an ideal scenario, frankly, and it's very direct contact.
And when we are training candidates and campaigns, what we say is the primary difference in the field is that you ask the voter, I'm here on behalf of Zoran. And if they say, well, I'm not sure he's my first choice in a classic campaign, that is the end of the discussion. You vote, you mark them no, and you move on. In a ranked choice voting campaign, that is the beginning of the discussion, because you want the voter, if they're not going to rank Zoran as number one, you want them to rank Zoran as number 2 and 3. And that's exactly what happened. And as a New York City voter, I was party to a lot of conversations where people were saying, well, who's going to be your number 1? Who's going to be your number 2? And it shifted back and forth depending upon how candidates were performing in the debates and in other things. But it was a much more dynamic discussion between the candidates and the voters, between campaign workers and individual voters, because it was a dialogue. As Andrew was saying, the message is there, but you've got to pick it up and use it correctly. And so a successful ranked choice voting campaign really has different components to it. The city has got to be an educator and run a good system, but the campaigns and the candidates talk to voters every single day. And I've had some elected officials in New York City say, oh, we had to spend too much time talking to voters about ranked choice voting. And I thought to myself, you're missing it. It's an opportunity to build a relationship with the voter. When you explain that they can rank, then the voter's grateful to that campaign for giving them more power. And you want to lean into it, which I think both of the campaigns on the call today really did, as well as the endorsers. We're finally getting endorsers who understand ranked choice voting. And I think that was a big difference in our election this year. Working Families Party going ahead and putting out a slate, others ranking and not just going for a one endorsement, also helps the voters feel more comfortable and allows them to use their full power and to rank.
Yeah,
And then
thank
all
you
of
so
this
much for that.
translates directly into what kind of mayor someone is going to be. You know, in the old system
Yes.
of campaigning, you succeed if you're really good at being divisive and tearing down your opponents. In ranked choice voting, you succeed when, exactly as these campaigns found, you can find common ground with all sorts of different types of people, build bridges, build coalition. And when it comes down to it, who do you want as your mayor? Who do you want as a governor? Who do you want in the Senate? You want people who can work with others, not just shut everyone else down.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Deb. Such an important point. I want to make sure we have some time to get to the many excellent questions coming in from the audience. We have just about 10 minutes. So let's start there. There's a couple of questions about RCV and adoption in more red state environments, right? People think of this reform as being more of a left-leaning reform. What experience or advice can you offer about approaching adoption of RCV in a red state? Maybe Deb, you could chime in.
We have seen some pushback over the last couple of years. Some of this is a result of outcomes in Alaska, where Sarah Palin lost under this system. And so Palin and Palin allies really mobilized against it. It's become a target of ALEC, who is working to prevent states from using this, and they're succeeding in a number of red states around the country. These prohibitions are passed by the state legislature, and that's how you can overturn them in the exact same way. And so this is a matter of folks getting together in those groups and electing people who are going to fight for this issue that matters, rather than letting their legislatures get away with banning a process that is just going to help the people. And so it's a longer road in some of these states where there's currently pushback. But there's progress to be made everywhere. It's by no means the end of the road. I think a good place to start is local use of ranked choice voting. If your state has prohibited ranked choice, I think your angle is local control. Let these cities and towns make choices for themselves. And so get that carve out and go from there.
Thank you for that. There's a couple of questions around. So part of the response to Zoran's incredible win in the primary has been about can we make predictions about what's going to happen in the midterm elections or beyond from this win? How much do you view this as being something that is specific to the New York City electorate, or are there takeaways that you see more broadly for other geographies?
Well, maybe the one thing I'll just propose, and I don't think that it necessarily makes sense to say what happens in New York City is applicable everywhere. I will say that, and some of you might have seen the video we did right after the presidential election, where Zoran went to neighborhoods. I mean, New York City, New York State had some of the biggest swings towards Donald Trump of anywhere in the country. A lot of it happened in working class immigrant communities, and many of those neighborhoods turned out and Zoran won in big ways. And while we don't know the exact number of voters that may have voted for Donald Trump in November, but who were we know that a lot of registered Democrats voted for Donald Trump in November. We do not know necessarily exactly if they were the very same people that then turned out and voted for Zoran in these neighborhoods, but it's pretty likely from what we've seen, which means that even if there is plenty that's extremely unique about New York City and its politics, there is something there that when you focus on the cost of living crisis, when you give people an economic agenda that is relevant to their lives, when you name the actual forces that are making life so difficult and talk about what government can do to make it better, you can bring a lot of voters back to the Democratic Party. And so I do think, while I would not say that people have to run on the exact same issues, and the other thing I would say, just to reiterate what I said at the top, was that also be very wary of people who say you can have the same ideology and agenda, but just have fancy videos. That's not going to cut it. A centrist or kind of corporate agenda with fancy videos, or it's not going to work. You actually do need ideology and an agenda and a fight for working class people. It doesn't have to be exactly what it is here. Not everybody's a democratic socialist, but there is a reason why Bernie Sanders is the most popular politician in the country, right? In red states and blue states. And it is not because he's does great on a video, right? So communicate well, upgrade, all of that, but it cannot, the style cannot be separated from the substance.
You're making me laugh a little, Andrew, because I'm thinking about what would that sort of corporate moderate videos, what would those look like and how compelling would they be, right? The wonderful thing about the videos was that they were reflecting back the magic of New York City, which most of us who are New Yorkers and actually live in the city experience. Yeah, it's gritty, it's dirty, it's all of these things. And it's also amazing to interact with so many different people in their own cultures and communities, eating their food, speaking their language. That is New York City. That's why we live here, right? Okay, we have just a few minutes left, and I want to ask you this. So it doesn't feel like it's on this call today, but in general, it feels that so much of our politics can be just really dark and really difficult these days. We have a lot of folks on the call today who are working in this space, and it can be hard to keep your morale up. What is it in this election that gave you hope? And what would you offer to folks in terms of drawing strength and resilience as we head into the midterm elections next year? Anyone? Susan, you want to kick us off?
We all have a lot of tools in our elections. RCV is a tool. Early voting, I think, also played out in the New York mayor's race in the primary. Learn your election system, invest in using the tools that you have, and connect with the voters. I think that the New York City example shows the tools are there, candidates can use them to really move issues and really touch people.
For me, I got hope from the positive coverage that this race got, because the race inspired people. There were viral moments, and this went national. You know, I work with groups in cities and states all across the country, and people are messaging me like, "Hey, did you see the Mango Lassi video?" Right? This event captured people's attention all over the country, not just within New York City. And it's an indication of how much people are looking for those bright spots, ready to embrace them and say, how can we get that here? And so we've seen a big surge in interest just in the 3 weeks since this race. The way that what happened in New York City can be a model to expand this kind of reform elsewhere. Ranked choice voting is one tool in the toolkit. It's an important one. It is, part of this complete breakfast to improve our elections.
Yeah, I think a lot of the reception to the cross endorsement, right, which we talked about as being a ranked choice voting strategy, it brought so much hope and so much, like, I was like obsessed with the comments and like feedback and like, how are folks digesting this? And it was very much a lot of like, this is what I want to see, and this is like this is motivating to me. It's inspiring to me. Like, and I think we want to, I felt like it was a move where it's like, this served all. And the communication from our communities was very clear. And this is a divergent path from traditional electoral politics. You always have to make the case for you, and there's always contrast built in there. But where folks were like, I want to see strategy for a common good, and how well they responded to that was definitely a highlight for me, and I think a lot of us here.
I'll just fully echo that. That was really such an important moment for this campaign, for this election. I remember some of the tweets being like, when Zoran and Brad rode up to their first joint event on a city bike together, people were like, is ranked choice voting the cure for male loneliness? That was a tweet I saw many times. But it was just, that was, such a perfect example of what this allows and fosters if people are willing to embrace it. And it should not be missed that Brad and Zoran cross-endorsing them. I mean, okay, we've only had 2 ranked choice voting elections, but it was still the first time that had happened in the history of New York City, that 2 candidates for mayor cross-endorsed each other in that way. And as you said earlier, Rebecca, if that had happened in 2021, I'm pretty confident there would have been a different outcome. And so it's such a meaningful moment, and I think such a perfect way on a beyond all the strategy and analytics, just on a personal human level, what ranked choice voting can bring to elections around the country that people are really hungry for.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Andrew. I mean, it also helped that they were both just fantastic candidates, right? That brought so much energy, authenticity, enthusiasm, genuine love for New York City and New Yorkers. I will never tire of that. But what makes me hopeful, to be perfectly honest, is just having you all here today. I am so honored to be in the company of all of you. Thank you all for your hard work and dedication to making the country better. So thank you all so much to our panelists, to Arena, especially to our Arena staff who are just wizards of technology, and folks at Forum NYC. Thank you everyone for joining today and spending the hour with us. Take care.
Thank you for having me. This has been a really delightful panel.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you again to all of our panelists. Before you head out, there is a feedback survey in the chat. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. It helps us understand what types of events best serve our community, and we will be greatly indebted to you if you would take that feedback survey before the end of the day today. Thanks again.
Thank you.